Welcome back to another episode of the YA Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Keaton, and I'm excited to continue this journey with you. If this is your first episode with us, thank you for joining us. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share, and go back and listen to some other episodes. We have a whole first season where we looked at the winning young adults in our Harvestfield book. We also had a few pop-up bonus episodes, and we're several episodes into season 2. This is our fourth and final look into the YA conference. And this session that we're going to look in on is Andy Abramson. Andy is out of Austin, Texas. He runs a nonprofit called Elementum, where he coaches and trains young adult leaders from across the state on how they can be more strategic in their ministry in reaching young adults. If you're trying to figure out where your church is at, or what strategies you can better do to reach your community, then this session is going to be perfect for you. So I'm excited as we dive in and just get some practical nuts and bolts of ministry and really leadership for our young adult outreach. So here is Andy Abramson's breakout on the YA conference.
Well, how are we doing today? We've had a good day. Everybody have a good day? Yeah, it's been good. It's been good. Man, I'm so excited to be with you here today. My name's Andy Abramson. I'm from Austin, Texas. And so, man, it is such an honor for me today to be with you, just to inspire you, to encourage you, and even to begin to put some closure on our time here together today. I know being in a space like this, a conference space, that you come in and you have so many great ideas and new things you've heard, and you've probably had great conversations amongst the people you've come with. But my hope is, for the next few minutes, is I want to give you an opportunity maybe just to kind of put some clarity around your day here together. And I'm really excited because today Ryan actually asked me to do something a little bit more practical. In terms of giving you some practical strategies, some practical next steps for developing your young adult ministry. Now, here's what I know, is that there really are probably 4 types of people in here, 4 types of churches in here. Okay, number one, some of you in here, you're pretty excited where your young adult ministry is. Right? You're so thankful for the community that's been built. You're excited about the people and what God is doing. My hope for you over these next few minutes is that God would continue to inspire you, continue to give you a vision for even what he wants to do more in your ministry. Okay? But I also recognize that there are some people in here, you come in this space kind of struggling. Right? In terms of ministry, of just saying, I'm not quite sure what we're doing. I'm not quite sure if we're having the impact that we want to have. My hope for you is I can give you some simple next steps to begin to look at what you could do and ultimately what God could be calling you to. I know there potentially could be people in here where maybe you're looking to figure out what engaging young adults looks like for the first time. And my hope is that even for the next few minutes, you would get some simple next steps of saying, this is what we're called to do. And maybe there's a group in here that you don't even know why you're here. My hope is that God would stir on your heart and you'd be inspired towards reaching this next generation. So I'm really excited today to go over some of this stuff. Now, here's what I gotta say. How many of you are a young adult in here? Okay, raise your hand. Now, all of you who are young adults in here, you need to look at me. Okay, there's a temptation that you're going to feel right now to kind of like dial down and turn off and think that this is for the leaders that you are under. But I want you to hear this today. This stuff that I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes is just as much for you as it is for your leaders. In fact, a few months ago, I got an opportunity to take my 18-year-old daughter to East Africa. And so I had the opportunity to help lead over 300 college ministry leaders in East Africa, and I was working through some of this same stuff. And I remember the conversation with her as she began to listen through some of these things and said, I now understand where the gaps are with the people that I care about, my friends, my classmates, those people who are closest to me. And so I want to encourage you, if you're a young adult in here, here's the thing. I don't know how else to say this, okay? This is not student ministries. This is not high school ministry. Listen to me. You are the engine of the ministry. Like, it depends on you. This is not leaders setting up programs and leaders planning events. It depends on you being the driver of the ministry, and you need to hear that. So I'm so excited to go. I want to introduce a little bit of my family. Do we have slides here? No? Maybe? Maybe not. Yeah, let's go. So here's a picture of my family. I want to introduce them real quick. My wife, Jen, who's in the middle, she's down here. Wave, Jen. Everybody. That's my wife, Jen. Then I have 5 kids. I have twins who are 20 years old. And so the 2 that are kind of smushed just to the right of my wife is my daughter, Abby, and my daughter, Brooke. They're 20 years old. Brooke just graduated from Full Sail University with an animation degree. So she's looking at doing digital animation. Her twin sister is a college athlete in Southern California studying business. And so those of you who are parents, you're like, twins right away? I'm like, yes, twins right away, right out of the gate. So, and then Macy, who just graduated from high school, who's in the back there, she is studying to become a pilot. And so she's working on her piloting license right now. Riley, who's kind of smushed, half of her face is cut off on the right there. She is 15 years old, and she loves doing like little mini movies. Any like video editors in here? Anyone like video editing? Yeah. Any TikTokers in here? Anybody like TikToking? No, like 3 of us. Well, she likes putting together these little TikToks. She got a TikTok that had 19 million views. So that's pretty crazy. I'll show it to you afterwards. It's not really that impressive. And then Drew, who's my youngest there, who's 13 years old. And so that's our family here together. I want to give you just kind of a quick snapshot of the story of how I got to this space here today. I was a youth and college young adult pastor for 13 years. Back in 2010, we began to recognize a need that churches were struggling in the area of young adult ministry. They were struggling to figure out how to engage with young adults, how to create systems and programs for young adults. So back in 2010, we actually started an organization to help local churches work with college students and young adults. And so for the last 13 and a half years, we've been doing that. We've had the opportunity to work with over 500 different churches around the country. And it is a joy when I'm always in spaces like this to be a part of what God is doing. So I'm excited. Okay, so here's what we've learned along the way. There's a couple things that we've learned, and I want to jump into a couple frameworks that we utilize. Number one is that we need to recognize, one of the things that we learned is as we're working with churches, is that there's a process of developing a young adult ministry. That there's steps and things that we need to think about as we think about the development of young adult ministry. And there's some commonalities and threads that we can begin to see in terms of what's next. Here's the 2 major problems that I see right now for people who are leading ministries. Number one is there's a temptation to copy and paste ministry. Okay? Here's what I mean by that. Is you come into a space like this, a conference, and you hear what other people are doing. Right? You're going to a breakout session and like, oh, that was really good. And you hear about what they're doing. Or you sit down with somebody over lunch and hear about what they're doing. And there's this temptation of just saying, if I can do what they do, then we can have the same impact. If I can structure the same things the way that they structure, if I can do what they do, if I can organize the way that they organize, then we can have some of the same fruit that they're experiencing in their ministry. And so there's a temptation to copy and paste ministry. The other problem that we see is the inability to understand the sequential nature of building a young adult ministry. And so what I want to do today for just a couple minutes is I want to give you some simple next steps. In fact, we're going to use really a framework that we utilize with leaders all the time that will give you some clarity in terms of, and here's my hope. One is that you can identify this is where we're at as a ministry. This is where we are at as leaders, as young adults, and also to give you some simple next steps moving forward. Now, here's the tension, that there's a difference between strategy and tactics, okay? Often we'll get tactic questions. What I mean by that is questions like, what curriculum should we use? What night of the week should we meet? Like, how should we organize our small groups? And those are important tactical questions, but those are different than strategy. Strategy is this idea of understanding what are some of the big development kind of pillars of ministry that are important for us to have the impact that we want to have. And so here's what we're going to do today is I'm going to give you two different kind of tools. And we're going to use the analogy of building a house. Okay, so that's going to be our framework that we're going to use for building a house. Here's the way that I describe it to people. So let's say Ryan and I are having a conversation. And in the midst of that conversation, I begin to share with Ryan, and this is true, that we're in the process of selling our house right now because we want to build a home, right? And so Ryan would be, oh, that's cool. Like, tell me a little bit about that. And I'm, beginning to describe things. And he says, what's your plan for building a house? And I said, okay, Ryan, here's what I'm going to do. Okay? First, I'm going to build the roof. And after I build the roof, I'm going to paint the kitchen. And then after I paint the kitchen, I'm going to do the electrical. And then after I do that, I'm going to pour the foundation. Ryan would look at me and think, bro, you're an idiot. That's not the way you build a house. But we laugh at something like that, but here's the challenge. For a lot of us, we're trying to build a roof on our ministry when that's not what we should be focusing in on. We're focusing on things that are further down the road when there are simple things in front of us that we need to think about. So here's what we're going to use, is we're going to talk about this idea of a house of two different rooms. Okay, we're going to talk about the upper room, and then we're going to talk about the lower room. Now, how many of you have a two-story house that you live in? Anybody have two-story houses? Okay. So normally, in most two-story houses, the upstairs is different than the downstairs. Okay, the upstairs often is that space where most of the bedrooms are at, most of the bathrooms are at, maybe the kids have the rooms up there. It's kind of the family area, right? The upper room is more the family area, where the downstairs, the lower room, is more like the common area. So if you invite people to come over to your house, where do you invite them? Usually the upper room or the lower room? The lower room, right? That's usually where the dining room is, and the kitchen, and the living room, and you hang out down there. Most of the time, people don't get invited into the upper room until they become a little bit closer with your family. Now, here's the challenge, is there's two different parts of ministry as well. There's the upper room of ministry and then the lower room of ministry. And here's how I want to describe it to you. The top is what we call the upper room. And the upper room is this. The upper room is helping the young adults in our ministry, the people in our ministry, have a vision for kingdom living. To have a vision for the kingdom of God, to have a vision for responding to the things that God is doing in their hearts and in their lives. And so we want to help people, help the young adults in our ministry get this opportunity in this picture of a vision for kingdom living. Now here's the question. I want you to take a minute and do this. I want you to think about, by the time that a young adult in your ministry finishes, okay, and that could be that they get a job and move away, could be that they get married or have kids and then transition into kind of the next season, what would be the qualities and characteristics that you're looking for in a young adult that's been a part of your ministry? Okay, take 1 minute, jot down a few things. What would be qualities and characteristics that you're looking for in the people in your ministry before they leave. Okay? Take 1 minute, go. Jot a few things down. Okay, go ahead and turn to the person next to you. Why don't you just share a couple of those things? Go ahead and share a couple of those things. What are qualities and characteristics that you're looking for in young adults before they would leave your ministry? What do you want them to look like? Okay, so here's what I want to challenge us here today. And I'm going to give you a list of 5 things that we've identified. But before I do that, it's this concept of beginning with the end in mind. Here's what I mean by this, is do we think about, as people in the ministry, what do we want to be true about the people that are a part of our ministry? Do we have a clear picture of the qualities and characteristics that we want to see God do in their lives before they leave our ministry? And here's what I would say is most churches, most ministries, most people in ministry, they don't think about the end. They don't have the end in mind. That they're not thinking about, here's the things we want to be true. Now, how can we help produce some of those things in the lives of our students? We just kind of like randomly pick things. Well, we'll do this curriculum because I found it online, or somebody recommended this, or this is the questions we're going to ask in our small groups, because we're not thinking about ultimately what are we trying to produce in people. So what I want to do is I want to give you actually 5 qualities and characteristics that we've identified as far as what we want to be true with the young adults before they leave the ministries that we're a part of. Okay, here's the 5. I'll just give them to you all here right away. Number 1 is we want to see a deep love for God, right? We want to see a young adult who is passionately in love with God. Now, we understand that there's a lot of play out in what that looks like, even in the panel discussion, in terms of like prayer and opening the scriptures. Like, we want to see people who ultimately put God in the center of their life and have a deep love and commitment for God. But secondly, we want them to understand that they're called to be lifelong disciple makers. Okay, I hope you understand this, that it is not just the leader's responsibility or the pastor's responsibility to make disciples, but if we are believers, we are given that call and that commission to make disciples. And we want every young adult before they leave to be committed to being disciple makers. Number 3 is we want a commitment to community. And what I would say about commitment to community is both the importance of saying, I need to be around other believers who are my age, as well as saying, I need to be committed to a larger community with other generations, i.e. the local church. So we want them to leave and say, commitment is a value and an important part of faith. Number 4, we want them to be understanding missional living. Here's what we mean by missional living. This understanding that every young adult is a missionary. Now, you may not get paid to go into ministry full time, but if you're in business or finance or education, you are a missionary going to a mission field. No matter where God sends you in the future, that you are an agent of reconciliation. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, that you are ministers of reconciliation as though God were making his appeal through you, that we are on mission. Last one is we want them to understand their gifts. Okay? understand their gifts. Okay, how many of you, any pastors in here? Any like full-time pastors? Okay, a couple people. Here's a question, right? So let's say you're a pastor of a church and you get a young adult that comes into your office and you begin to like converse with that young adult. And you quickly realize, as you're listening to their story, beginning to dialogue with them, that they have a deep love for God. That they're committed to make disciples. That they understand the value of community and will commit to that. That they see themselves as missionaries and then understand their gifts and are willing to utilize those gifts. Do you think you'd be excited? I'd be like, man, who in the world dropped this gift from heaven to me? Right? But here's the question. What if every young adult that was in our ministry displayed certain qualities and characteristics before they left? Do we have the end in mind? And this ultimately is this idea of the upper room. What does it look like for people in your ministry to move into the upper room? But secondly, we talk about this idea of the lower room. Okay, in the lower room, I want you to think about the lower room as being like the programs and the structures and the systems and the things they do. These are spaces for guests. They're spaces for people to come and check things out. People move in and out. And here's what I want to tell you. We need to think about the lower room. We need to think about these parts of ministry. We need to have impactful, inviting spaces into the lower room. But here's what the challenge is we need to have both of those things. We need to have both upper room, that people are moving towards kingdom living, and lower room, the structures and the programs and the things that we're providing. Now, one of the things that they talk about, in fact, there's a book that talks about this, is they talk about the 4 Ps of who comes, why somebody comes into the lower room. I'm going to give you those 4 Ps. Number 1 is there's personality. Okay, sometimes people are drawn to the lower room, the programs, the functions of the ministry, because of a personality. Right? Because they love the way that Ryan communicates the gospel. Maybe they resonate with a certain small group leader of saying that personality, that person even like pulls me closer to wanting to engage with the ministry. And so sometimes people will come because of a personality. Okay, secondly, sometimes they come because of the place. Now, it's interesting, a few weeks ago, actually a couple months ago now, I was in Tucson, Arizona working with one of our churches. And it's a church plant that's happening right by the University of Arizona in Tucson. And Chris is his name, who's leading us. And he was driving my wife and I around campus, kind of showing us. And we drove by kind of this one side of the campus, and he says, "That's the spot." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He said, "We want to plant our church in that middle school right there. Because it's right across the street from the majority of the dorms, and here's where all the kids hang out in the field, because it's the perfect place that will draw students and young adults and college students into the life of that community." So sometimes people will come because of the proximity of the place or the ease of the place. But then we also see sometimes it's the programs, right? Sometimes the programs are the things that draw us. Maybe it's an event, maybe a game night, a weekly Bible study, that the program. And then the last thing, and I would say that this is the biggest thing for young adults, is people. The relationships of saying my roommate goes to this ministry, or my friend goes, or my boyfriend or my girlfriend goes, and because they go, I'm interested in going as well. So there are 4 Ps that bring people into the lower room. Here's what I want to tell you. Those things will initially draw young adults into the lower room, but they will not keep young adults in the lower room. Like they might be the initial reason of somebody coming into the ministry, but here's what we have to do, is we have to help invite them into the upper room. Because what we see is if the reason that they came to the lower room changes, they'll leave. So my friends used to go to this ministry, but no longer do. Ryan used to teach, but now he's taken a different job. They used to do a program here, or they used to meet in this place, because if we never move people from the lower room to the upper room, it's not an opportunity for them to stick. And COVID showed us this more than anything, right? Look at this list. Personalities changed. I bet you if I were to ask you how many of you either knew or were directly kind of related to a key staff position changing within the last couple of years, I bet you most of you would raise your hand. If I asked you the question, we couldn't meet in terms of place. Our programs got shut down. The people left, and what happened? What happened? Statistics tell us a third of the people stayed, a third of the people walked away from church altogether, and a third of the people switched churches. Why is that? Because they were in the lower room. Because here's what I'm here to tell you. When a young adult catches a vision bigger than the lower room, a vision for kingdom living, it doesn't matter if the personality changes. It doesn't matter if the place changes. It doesn't matter if the programs change or the people change, because there's something bigger that is drawing them in, of saying, yes, those are the things that brought me into the ministry, but now I have been brought into the upper room, and I have a greater vision for kingdom living that allows me to have impact and be a part of this ministry. And so what is that? Here's what that is. That movement from the lower room to the upper room is your disciple-making strategy. How are we going, as young adults come into our ministries, how are we going to walk alongside, disciple, and care for them so that we can help move them past the people, the place, the programs, the personality? We can give them a vision for kingdom living and disciple them from the lower room into the upper room. For a lot of us, we need to think about what is this disciple-making strategy, but here's the challenge. Most of us think about disciple-making as a buffet, not a map. Now, when I was a kid, I loved buffets. But the older I get, buffets are less appetizing for me. Right? Because it's this moment of like, they just throw a bunch of things on the table, and then you can do whatever you want to do. I can have 4 desserts. I can have all meat. I can do whatever I want to do. I just take my plate, and I walk down the buffet, and I take a scoop of this, and a scoop of that, and a scoop of this. But here's the question. A lot of us are doing discipleship the same way. We're simply putting things on the table and hoping that people figure it out, versus a map. And a map is saying, how am I going to move this young adult from this point to this point? And from this point to this point? And how am I going to intentionally move? So some of us, we need to think about this idea of strategy of discipleship. Okay, here's the last thing I want to do for the last 2 minutes. I'm going to go through this really fast, okay? Last thing I'm going to give you, I want to give you 6 stages of ministry. Here's my challenge for you. I want you to think about your ministry. I want you to think about what stage you're in. I want you to think about what are the key things that you need to begin to develop in your stage of ministry, and ultimately what moving forward looks like. So here's the 6 stages. Okay, I want to give these to you. These are the 6 stages that we go through with different churches as we analyze where they're at in ministry that give them simple next steps. Okay? So, first is what we call stage 0. Stage 0 is a church or ministry that comes to us and says, hey, we don't have anything for young adults. We have nothing. We know we need to do something, but we don't really know where to start. Here's what I want to tell you. If you're in this stage of ministry, there's 3 things that you need to think about focusing on at stage 0. Number 1 is you need to think about your context. You need to think about your context. Here's the reality. The city that you're in is unlike any other city. That there are unique opportunities, unique hurdles that you're going to experience, and you need to understand what is the context in which God has called me to minister in. Number 2, you need to think about beginning with discipleship and think about how do we begin to draw relationally people into a disciple-making relationship. And the last thing we want to think about is launching something simple. Here's what I would say, is most people want to jump to number 3 right away. How quickly can we start a Bible study? How quickly can we start a Sunday school class? And one of the things I would encourage you to do is if you're in this kind of groundbreaking kind of preparation period, you need to think about context, beginning with discipleship, and starting something simple. Okay? So I want you to imagine if we're building a house, this is like clear cutting the ground. It's like getting the ground ready for building a house. Okay, but then we're going to move to stage 1, and stage 1 is this idea of building a foundation. So once we have the ground cleared in preparation, now we want to begin to build a foundation for our ministry. Okay, there's a couple things in this stage of what you need to focus on. Number 1 is you need to be thinking about team leadership. How do you begin to think about creating ownership more than just with one leader? I challenged a lot of you who are young adults earlier of just asking the question, what does it look like for you to have ownership of being the engine of the ministry? One of the things that you need to create of a foundation of a ministry is saying, what does ownership and team leadership look like? Secondly, is we want to think about a disciple-making strategy. A disciple-making strategy. What does moving from the lower room to the upper room look like? And then lastly, we want to think about vision pre-work. These are conversations of beginning to ask ourselves the question, what does God have for us as we begin to move forward? Okay? Here's what I want to tell you. 90% of the churches that I talk to every year are in stage 0 or stage 1. So I'm guessing for a lot of you, this is some of the areas that you need to think about focusing as you begin to move forward. Okay, I'm going to go through the last few really quickly. Okay? We move from clear cutting, prepping the ground, building the foundation to stage 2. Stage 2 is like framing the house. Okay, framing the house is beginning to put some structure to that house. There's 3 things we want to focus on when we think about framing the house. Number 1, vision and strategy. Number 2 is we want to begin to move towards a disciple-making culture. And then number 3 is we want to begin to align all of the things that we're doing to accomplish the things that God has called us ultimately to. Okay? Next, stage 3 is finishing the interior. Finishing the interior. There's 3 things we want to focus when we think about finishing the interior. Systems and structures. What are, as we have a clear vision for where God is taking us, what are the systems and structures that we need to build? How do we align our leadership to accomplish the mission and vision God has given us as a unique church? And then how do we create some execution processes to do that? Okay, number 4, stage 4 is inviting others in. There's 3 things, layers of leadership. So now we want to begin to see additional roles of leadership filled. We want to see now discipleship multiplication happening, multiple generations, and we want to begin to see high external engagement. And then the last one here quickly is stage 5 is sending. Sending. We're actually sending people out of the house. This is where we move from multiplication strategy to sending strategy to high leadership multiplication. Okay? So I want you to think about, for a minute or 2, here's what I want you to do. Is I want you to ask yourselves 3 questions, okay? Here's a couple questions for reflection, okay? Number 1, what stage are you in your ministry development? right? If you were to go through these 6 different stages, where would you say that you're in those stages? Number 2 is what is the most important focus areas in that current stage? And then number 3, what have you overlooked from a previous stage? So I'm going to give you 1 minute. Once you jot down and reflect through those couple questions, these are questions I would encourage you to have conversations about with the people that you came here with today at some point in the next 7 days. Okay, take 1 minute. What stage of ministry are you in? What is the most important areas of focus? And then what have you maybe overlooked from a previous stage? Take 1 minute and jot a couple things down. Okay, last thing I want to provide for you, and then I'm going to pray for you. There's a QR code here, and this actually will give you a PDF of everything that I just kind of went through with some kind of descriptions of that. And so there's a quick video training on there. You can kind of tag that, and then also there should be a link to download. So there's a PDF that you guys can utilize to walk through if there's something that you didn't catch along the way. Okay, here's what I want to do for you as we finish up here. Man, I want to just pray for you. I want to pray because I want to pray for your ministries. I want to pray for the things maybe that God did in your hearts today, and maybe some of the questions that you're wrestling with as young adults or leaders. And I want you even to pray for maybe potentially God revealing what some of those next steps would be for each of you.
Thank you for joining in for another episode. I hope that this talk with Andy was helpful for you. If you would like to get in contact with Andy, feel free to reach out to me, rkeaton@tnbaptist.org, and I'd love to get you connected. He's a great coach, he's a great mentor, and he has a lot of great resources. If there's anything that we can do to better serve you in your church, reach out. If you have any future topics you want us to talk about, again, send them our way. Thank you so much for the gifts through the cooperative program, because without your giving and without your cooperation, resources like this wouldn't be possible. The resource that we were able to provide for a very significantly reduced cost in the YA conference wouldn't be possible without churches like yours giving to the cooperative program. So thank you so much for your cooperation. We have several more episodes ahead in this season, so make sure to be on the lookout for that as we release that in just a few weeks. And until we meet again, go win Tennessee for Jesus. See you next time.